In January, President Donald Trump entered office and immediately began signing a deluge of executive documents. There were 200 executive actions, memoranda, and proclamations on the first day alone.
President Trump was sworn into office earlier today and has now signed a series
with a barrage of executive actions rolling
President Donald
back the
Trump
policies
signed another
of
executive order today, this one aimed at scaling back financial
Buried
aid.
somewhere in one of those stacks was a memo that highlighted a surprising connection between the president and the members of a Native American tribe. And its contents sent shockwaves through their homeland in eastern North Carolina.
This is definitely a giant leap forward for us as a people.
I'm Anissa Khalifa. This is The Broadside, where we tell stories from our home at the crossroads of the South. This week, how a campaign promise kept is firing up one of the largest tribes in the country and renewing centuries-old questions about who gets to be Native in America.
I am Sarah Nagem, editor of the Border Belt Independent. We're a digital nonprofit news organization in southeastern North Carolina.
We reached out to Sarah to help explain one of the oldest and most complicated political fights in Washington, D.C. Well, she did her best.
If I could explain things that happen in Washington,
Right. I mean, obviously we don't know, but if you have any thoughts to share about it. The issue involves the Lumbee, a Native American tribe with nearly 60,000 members living mostly in eastern North Carolina, and their ongoing push for full federal recognition. So, I mean, this can be a really opaque process. How does a tribe actually get federal recognition?
it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, and a lot of money. The money involved is phenomenal in terms of lobbying Congress. In terms of time, you sort of have to meet these criteria. There's all sorts of paperwork you have to submit. It is a very lengthy process that can go on for years and years and years.
Sarah isn't exaggerating. The Lumbee tribe has been trying to gain full recognition for 136 years. But one of the biggest developments in that long struggle comes from North Carolina's fairly recent status as a battleground political state.
The Lumbee tribe traditionally voted Democrat. Then Donald Trump came along in 2016 and it all changed. He promised full federal recognition, but didn't follow through. So did Joe Biden. And now Trump and Kamala Harris are making the promise again this year.
The Republican National Convention opened an office in Pembroke, where the Lumbee headquarters is located, in 2022. The goal was to sort of build on the momentum of this shift toward Republican candidates.
And that early outreach worked. The tribe's home region voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in 2024, helping his campaign win the state. Now, the story could have ended there. But then, during Trump's first week in office, came the memo.
Federal recognition of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina.
I love the Lumbee tribe. So this is the first big step, right?
This would be a huge step for them.
Yeah, they were with me all the way. They were great. North Carolina, Lumbee tribe.
President Trump signed a memorandum recommending federal recognition for the Lumbee to the Department of the Interior. What does this actually mean for the tribe?
It's exciting, right? You know, no president had done that before. At its heart, what does it mean? Not a whole lot. But it does direct the Secretary of the Interior to submit a plan within 90 days outlining the potential paths to full federal recognition for the Lumbee.
According to Sarah, that could include approval from the Bureau of Indian Affairs or a federal court decision. But she says those pathways were abandoned by the Lumbee a long time ago. And that's because of one small problem.
Yeah, well, the main barrier is the Lumbee Act of 1956, which says, you know, you cannot have full federal recognition.
If you're confused right now, that's understandable. because the Lumbee were actually recognized by the federal government in 1956. But that bill, which said they were in fact a tribe, also prohibited them from receiving federal benefits. A sort of partial recognition, you could say. So why would Congress do that? Well, it all comes down to the timing.
The 1950s was the era of Indian termination. So it was actually the policy of the United States government to, as it was stated, to get out of the Indian business.
This is John Lowery, chairman of the Lumbee tribe. The termination era he's referring to was from 1953 to 1968. During this period, the U.S. government encouraged Native Americans to leave reservations and pushed an agenda of assimilation. To speed up that process, many tribes were terminated, which means that they had their federal recognition revoked.
So during this time of upheaval with regards to tribal policy, the Lumbee were recognized. But at the same time, because it was the era of termination, they said, yes, you are a tribe. We do recognize you. You are who you are, but you're not eligible to services and benefits that other tribes are. And since 1956, we've been in this, what we call a legal limbo.
And this isn't a small matter for the tribe. At stake are potentially tens of millions of federal dollars for services like education, healthcare, and transportation. And according to Chairman Lowry, there's likely only one realistic path forward.
Very little can change without an act of Congress. And the reason being is because Congress passed the Lumbee Act in 1956. And Congress states that we cannot receive any services or benefits. So only Congress can undo what Congress has done.
Which brings us back to the president's memorandum.
We have had other, presidential candidates and presidents to say that they have supported us and have said all the right things. And what we saw with President Trump's memo is a step that no other president has taken. And so this is definitely a giant leap forward for us as a people. And it is now, according to the President of the United States policy that the Lumbee will receive our full federal recognition.
And while he acknowledges that the potential windfall of funding could transform his community, Chairman Lowry says that for his people, full recognition has a much deeper meaning.
I tell people this. As Native people, we are the minority of the minority. And for us just to be here shows just how strong and just how resilient our ancestors were. And, when you're the minority of the minority in a nation like America, you get overlooked. You are forgotten about. What your ancestors went through is forgotten about. And so this step is, to me, is the United States acknowledging our ancestors, is the United States saying, you have not been forgotten. It is a way for us to understand that the struggles of those who come before us were not in vain.
And for now, Chairman John Lowery, like many Lumbee, is cautiously optimistic. But that hope in his voice hides an ironic reality, one that journalist Sarah Nagem says is at the center of this fight, and that of hundreds of other unrecognized tribes in the United States.
I think it's easy to look at this whole situation and see the design flaws, right? We are a country where Native Americans had been here for thousands of years and pushed out by European colonizers. And now it's the U.S. government, where only 4 members of Congress are Native American, who are deciding who gets to be Indian enough to be recognized, to get federal benefits. And, again, it's easy to look at that and say, something is wrong here.
Coming up after a break, we speak to the woman who literally wrote the book, Who Gets to Be Native in America, and find out why this is all so confusing. Hey y'all, what do AI chatbots, ASMR, and diet culture all have in common? They're all topics explored on Embodied, the Ambie Award-winning podcast from our friends here at WUNC. Each week, host Anita Rao explores all kinds of things that can be hard to talk about, like sex, health, and relationships. Embodied takes on the taboo to answer important questions about our bodies and our society. Nothing is off limits. Here, guests share stories about topics like the dynamics of egg donation or the profits and pitfalls of the self-care industry. Find Embodied every week wherever you listen to podcasts. Over 9 million people claimed Native identity on the last U.S. Census. Only 2 million of those people are actually enrolled in a tribe. There are currently 574 federally recognized tribes. The other 400 or so are not, but some are recognized by their states. And all of that adds up to a lot of thorny questions around who belongs to a tribe and who decides who's Indian enough. I certainly don't know, so I asked an expert.
My name is Carrie, Lowry Schuettpelz. I am an enrolled member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, and I am an associate professor at the University of Iowa, where I also run the Native Policy Lab.
Carrie is the author of a book called The Indian Card: Who Gets to Be Native in America, where she explores the contradictions and complexities of Native identity. She says that all these systems of categorization and membership for Native people are a relatively new concept.
You know, the idea of becoming a member of a tribe wasn't a Native construct. Native tribes didn't have membership cards 200 years ago, right?
The whole thing has its roots in a piece of legislation passed in 1887 called the Dawes Act. In it, Congress said that reservation land that had been communally held by tribes should be redistributed into individual allotments. They wanted Native Americans to homestead like white farmers.
And in order to do that, the federal government had to determine who was eligible for one of these plots. And so the ideas around enrollment, tribal roles, membership, and that sort of thing really picked up steam during that phase of policy. The goal really was assimilation, right? And so it was meant to get rid of the power of tribes. The idea was that individual Native people would look to the federal government, the U.S. government.
But the last 100 years have been all over the map, which is partly why there are so many self-identifying Native Americans today and so few with tribal membership.
One of the things you have to remember is that phases of federal Indian policy almost seem like a ping pong match. They're going back and forth, two ends of an extreme. One of those flip-flops that happened was between the early 1960s and into the 1980s. The federal government sort of flip-flopped between the idea of terminating tribes to this idea of self-governance. And as that was happening, you had a lot of tribes that had been terminated from the federal rolls. And the federal government did not just automatically reinstate them.
You're a member of the Lumbee tribe. Can you tell us about your people? Who are the Lumbee?
The name Lumbee was really sort of codified in the 1950s. But regardless of what people have called us over the years, we have existed for a long, long time. There are archaeological records going back thousands of years in the Pembroke area, in particular in Robeson County. It was the coming together of different coastal tribes along with white people and Black people. And so we're sort of this amalgamation of people who were escaping colonization in really significant ways. More recently, some of the things that I was always taught growing up that we had a lot of pride around, the Lumbee have this storied history of justice, thinking about justice. We fought the KKK. I mean, that's one of the Battle of Hayes Pond, thinking about all of the things you're taught as a Lumbee child growing up about what makes us proud. At the same time, I will say, sort of on the more pragmatic side of things, one of the things that I'm very proud of as it relates to sort of being Lumbee and what we've managed to do is, even without full federal recognition, we have managed to do a lot of things, right? We have a great headquarters building. We do have elements of governance. We have things that have been put into place that have really helped support this idea of sovereignty and really helped support this idea of how do you support your people, right? Despite not having the same levels of federal support that other recognized tribes do.
So here in North Carolina, there are 8 state-recognized tribes, but only one that is fully recognized by the federal government, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. They have traditionally been opposed to full federal recognition for the Lumbee. Why is that? And what does it say about the way the system is set up?
I think that there have been some other tribes that have been very vocal on their opposition to Lumbee recognition. And look, it's their right to do that. I do think that the system is not set up for all of us to succeed, right? So one of the biggest challenges with federal support in Indian country is that the amount of money that the federal government has allocated toward Native tribes has not increased in decades, right? And so one of the things that becomes challenging is that as each newly recognized tribe comes into the fold, the pot of money doesn't grow. Other people's slice of the pot just gets smaller. And that's a really difficult reality to face.
So coming back to this present moment, last week, President Trump signed a memorandum recommending federal recognition of the Lumbee to the Department of the Interior. Do you think that the recent developments we've seen might have ramifications beyond the Lumbee tribe? I know there are hundreds of unrecognized tribes in the United States.
The Lumbee are in a very unique position because we have this historical legislation that granted us that first part of the recognition, which is, yes, you are an Indian tribe. I think that, yes, it may have some impact, but probably it won't have much. I think what it has done, though, and has the potential to do is point the spotlight at this issue, right? I would say that the vast majority of people who I talk to across the country and through my work, they don't necessarily understand federal recognition, and they don't understand its impact and importance on tribes. And I think that the more that we can start to inform people about sort of what this all means and the injustices surrounding it and, why it's important, I think that does nothing but help.
And in the same week of this memorandum, Trump also gave an executive order to change the name of the mountain Denali back to Mount McKinley, which reverses that 2015 name change that gave that mountain an indigenous Alaskan name. What do you make of this seemingly contradictory set of, high-profile actions by the president that happened so close together?
It is a little bit of whiplash, right? When you look at, if you lined up all of the different memos and executive orders that have a deep and significant impact on Indian country, a lot of them contradict each other, right? And so that I think that is hard to navigate. And at the same time, it's not unique for us. The idea of thinking that something really positive is happening and then having something negative happen at the same time, that's something that we've dealt with for hundreds of years.
And ultimately, it's a pretty good metaphor for what it means to be a Native American, where arcane, confusing, and often dehumanizing federal policies collide with deeply personal feelings of identity.
I think that in part it goes back to this idea of belonging and feeling like you're part of something, right? When I started writing my book, The Indian Card, and thinking about Native identity, one of the things that inspired that book was the idea that I carry this card around in my wallet, right? So my Lumbee enrollment card, it looks just like a driver's license. And it's something that sort of tangibly says, I am a member of this tribe. And I try not to minimize the importance of that, because I think that on the one hand, you could say, well, it's just a card, and who needs a card to know who they are? But on the other hand, I do think it actually is important, right? And so, I think that some of these federal structures that have been set up around recognition and all of that, there are absolutely challenges with those structures that need to be fixed and should be made sort of more just and equitable. But at the same time, I think that receiving that federal recognition, it sort of does the same thing that receiving your enrollment card does, which is it provides this layer of proof of this deeper sense of I belong here and we belong here.
Carrie Lowry Schuettpelz's book, The Indian Card, Who Gets to Be Native in America, is out now and getting rave reviews. If you'd like to follow Sarah Nagem's work at the Border Belt Independent, we've dropped a link to their site in the show notes. Special thanks this week goes out to WUNC's Will Michaels, who shared tape from his interview with John Lowery. This episode of The Broadside was produced by me, Anissa Khalifa, and our editor, Jared Walker, with help from Charlie Shelton Ormond. Wilson Sayer is our executive producer. The Broadside is a production of WUNC North Carolina Public Radio and is part of the NPR network. If you have feedback or a story idea, you can email us at broadside@wunc.org. And if you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating, a review, or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back next week.